Hey guys, welcome back to Spices and Flavors. So today we are not in the kitchen baking anything, but instead we are sitting here and having a little chit chat. Well, not chit chat in the real sense, but we are going to discuss few baking related queries that I'm sure most of you might be having or might have had at some point of the time. Of lately, I have been getting a lot of DMs from you guys on Instagram specifically regarding why does a cake sink or why does my bread crumble and some basic baking queries. So I thought it would be better to put everything into a video. So that's why I had also conducted a Q&A session on Instagram and I have collected few questions from there. So today I thought I'll just sit and answer and solve your queries and teach or maybe share some of my baking knowledge with you all. But wait a minute, didn't the video say professional baker is gonna answer all your queries? Where is the professional baker? Okay, so let me take a moment here to introduce you all to the professional baker who's gonna answer all your queries today. So let's meet. For those of you who are new here and do not know, let me introduce myself. Hi, I'm Sushma here, the baker, the blogger, and the YouTuber behind spicesandflavors.com, your journey to home baking. I did my post-graduation in biochemistry from Mumbai University and then worked in UCO Bank as an assistant manager. Got married, moved back to New Zealand and started my passion of baking and cooking. So to take it to the next level, I did a year-long certificate course in baking from Era Polytechnic, Christchurch, New Zealand. So I also have a video about my college tour which I shot way back, I think 3 years back, which is still there on YouTube. I'll link it up here or in the description box below if you would like to have a look into how my day looked when I went to college here in New Zealand. So yes, this was also a part of the Q&A question that I had got, which was where did I do my course from. So I did it from Era Polytechnic, Christchurch, New Zealand. For the ease of this video, I have divided it into 3 parts: cookies, bread and cakes. And if time permits, I'll also cover some miscellaneous questions that I have got. So if I haven't answered any of your queries, then you can leave it in the comment section of this video, or you can also DM me on Instagram and ask your queries there. And if not, you can also consider subscribing to our newsletter and ask me your queries with your email address. So that was all part of our introduction today. Let's get into the Q&A series. Okay, now I have noted it all down in this book, little book. So if you see me going up and down, then just let me tell you that I'm reading it through my book and nothing else. I know I'm a bit old school and I do not like to take screenshots or note it down on my phone. I find this as much convenient and reliable. The first question is, why do cookies turn softer the next day? Okay, so to ensure that your cookies are first fully baked, what you are looking, depending upon the cookie that you are making, is that the edges are crisp and golden in color, whereas the center portion or the middle portion is a little paler in color as compared to the sides. And once cooked, once you're sure that it is baked fully, then you need to be sure that you are cooling it completely. Do not be in a hurry to store it. So if stored warm, that's when your cookies turn softer. So ensure that it is cooled completely, then store in an airtight container. I promise it stays good for at least 3 days, 3 to 4 days even. If stored properly in an airtight container, that is once cooked and once cooled completely. So another little trick that I haven't tried but I have heard from my friends is that if you add a piece of bread along with the cookies into the airtight container in which you are storing, so the bread tends to absorb the moisture and from the interiors and ensures that the cookies remains crisp. So you can try this method if you like. Personally, I haven't tried. Okay, the second question is, my cookies spread a lot. So you have to understand that the reason behind why a cookie spread. So there are 2 reasons for this. One is the sugar content. So you all know that sugar when melts, it spreads, right? So if your batter has too much sugar in it, next time try reducing the sugar so that way the cookies won't spread a lot. So the second reason is that you are incorporating too much air into the batter. So while baking, the air spreads, which causes the cookies to spread. So ensure that you're reading your recipe well. So if a recipe says beat your butter for just 3 to 4 minutes or until it is just soft, then please do stop at that point, because the more you beat your butter, more air you're incorporating into the batter and the cookies are gonna spread more. And of course, chilling the dough also helps here. So butter hardens when you put it into the fridge. So when you put it directly into the oven, that is from fridge to oven, butter takes a little bit longer time to melt. So that's the reason the cookies won't spread faster if you are chilling the dough beforehand. So 3 things: reduce the amount of sugar, ensure that you're not beating the batter more, and the 3rd thing, ensure that you're also chilling the dough where needed. So that was the questions regarding baking cookies. Now let's get into bread. Interesting, right? So the most common query is that my bread turns dense. So you might have heard this answer before and you might be thinking, oh, it's such a lame answer, but it's a fact that you need to knead your bread really well. I mean bread dough really well. So there are a couple of points when you know what you have to note while kneading. One is that you have to push your dough with the heels and bring it back and knead. So just kneading it for 5 to 10 minutes like we make for chapati dough won't be enough. Depending upon the recipe, you need to knead the dough to the right stage. So a good starting point here may be at least a minimum of 18 to 20 minutes. Or most of the times you will get a success when your dough is tacky enough. What do you mean by tacky is that when you touch your finger with the dough and lift it, you would see that your finger is releasing but with some resistance. So that is the stage till where you have to knead the dough. At least that is the starting point. And then depending upon the recipe, you can alter or change it. Another thing is that while kneading, ensure that you are not adding too much flour. So too much flour would also give a dense loaf. So what you can do is instead grease your worktop with some oil and then knead. So that way you are ensuring that you are not adding too much flour and the batter remains moist and not dry. That also brings us to the second query, which is why does a bread loaf crumble? A bread loaf crumbles when there is not enough structure developed. So how does a structure develop? It develops when the gluten strengthens. How does the gluten strengthen? Simply by kneading. Let me break down this gluten into a simpler format so that you guys can understand. So basically gluten is a type of protein that is present in flour. The percentage of gluten depends upon which flour you are using. So bread flour has more higher percentage of protein as compared, which is gluten, as compared to a regular maida or all-purpose flour. So when this protein comes in contact with water or milk, which you use to make as a liquid ingredient, which is a liquid ingredient while making bread dough, what happens is that it interlinks with each other to form a structure. So this structure is what holds the gases that the yeast release. So this gases gets trapped in between the structure formed by gluten, and as it bakes, it rises. But the gluten doesn't allow the gases to rise way too much. It holds everything back, giving the bread its proper structure that we see with the naked eyes. So that is the reason why a structure of the bread is super important, which is basically formed by this gluten. So you have to make sure that you are developing the gluten well by kneading it. So under kneading is what causes the bread loaf to crumble, because there is no structure in it. The other factor that can also inhibit this is the adding too much of fat. So fat, that is butter or oil, whatever you are using, inhibits the development of gluten. And hence in most of the recipes, especially while making bread, you will see that fat is added at a later stage, so that we give enough time for the gluten to develop, and when you add fat, it is not going to affect the structure so much. And this is the main reason why while making a pastry, tart or anything, the butter is added first to the flour and crumbled with the help of your hands. So in that case, we do not want the gluten to develop, and that's the reason why it is the first step in making a tart shell, whereas that's the same reason the butter is added at a later stage while making a bread dough. The other two things that can cause your bread to crumble is that you have added too much flour while kneading and there is not enough water to hold the structure. So see how everything is interlinked. If you add too much flour, the bread would remain dry and it won't have enough moisture and it won't have that structure and texture. So it's all interlinked to each other. So why, to put it in, to answer in the bullet points, why does my bread loaf crumble? Under kneading, too much fat, too much flour, and not enough water. So this actually leads us to the third most common baking mistake or baking query, which is, why does my bread split while baking? Or especially in the sides, you might have noticed that sometimes your bread splits. So why does this happen? So this happens mainly for two reasons. If your bread dough is too wet. So remember, I mentioned about your dough to be tacky. So what if happens if it is sticky or it is way too moist? In that case, what happens is that the water is what converts into steam, and steam will rise while baking and it pushes the bread dough. So that is one push from the water moisture converting into steam and pushing the bread dough. The second one is because of the gases released by yeast. So when both of this come together, there is an uncontrollable rise in the bread dough. But the crust is hard, so it is not possible to break through the crust. So this gases and steam looks for a weaker point to burst out. And usually the sides, especially a little above the tin, because towards the base, the tin holds the bread, right? The bread loaf pan would be holding it. But when you see a little rise above the tin is where mostly your bread dough splits. So there is no support for the dough to hold. So that is the weaker point. So these gases pushes the weaker point and bursts out. So that is why you see your bread splitting. So one reason could be too much water, which you have to ensure that your dough is not sticky but tacky. The second reason is that your bread remains too dry. So now what happens if it is too dry? How will it remain dry? You would be saying, I'm using the same amount of water as the recipe says, but you might have added too much flour while kneading. So what would a bread dough which remains too dry make? So what happens is, when the bread dough is too dry, it would develop a crust even before the gases are released and even before the baking happens, because of course the oven is super hot. For breads we generally bake at higher temperatures. So the oven is hot, so even before the gases are released, the crust is formed on the bread. Now the gases need a way out, right? It cannot stay inside. So the gases looks for a way to burst out. Now since the crust is super hard, again the weaker point is the sides. So the crust is already formed, so the gases pushes out from the side, and hence you see a split in the bread while baking. So these are the major two reasons for your bread to split, which is if it remains too moist or if it is too dry. I hope it's not too much for you all to grasp in a video, and you are following along with me in all this series, and hope it makes sense. Just leave a comment yes in the comment section below, so that I know you guys are interested in knowing about science of baking and I can keep making such videos. Okay, so the next thing is, so the next question is, why does bread crack while slicing? So this happens when you have not allowed your bread to cool completely. So a bread takes a minimum of 2 to 3 hours to cool completely. Now what happens is, when the bread dough gets out of the oven and is in the bread pan, it still it's hot and is still under the cooking process. So there are steam still trapped inside the bread, which as and when it releases, it cooks as well as cools down the bread. So it is super important to allow your bread to cool completely before slicing, or else it would definitely crumble while and you won't get a neater finish, I would say. And again, the second reason for it could be a lack of structure development, which is super important in case of a bread to knead well. I know I have been saying this a lot, but you understand the basics, right? So over the period of time, you can also think about investing in a stand mixer. So mostly the recipes specify the time duration for a stand mixer, so you know you won't, so there are very little chances of going wrong when making in a stand mixer. I use the brand, so I often get these queries about equipments, tools, which branded which brand I'm using or which oven to buy and things like that. So I think that would require a whole new separate video because it's too much to explain. Right from the simple tools that you need to ovens, I think I would make a separate video. Let me know if you guys are interested in such videos as well, apart from the recipe videos that I share, all this that I have been sharing all this while on YouTube so far. So whatever your choice is, let me know. So I'll make a note of it and then make a video depending upon that. Okay, next question, proceeding to our next question, which is, can we make 100% whole wheat flour at home? Of course, why not? You definitely can make a whole wheat bread at home, but it does need a little practice and it does need a little bit of technique. I'm working on it and I'll soon update you guys about the same. Next is, can we replace instant yeast with same quantity of active dry yeast in a recipe? Yes, instant yeast and active dry yeast are more and the less can be interchanged in a recipe without altering any other ingredients. But this would not be the case for a fresh yeast. So for a fresh yeast, the quantities would differ, which I'll leave a note here or in the description box below because it is not on top of my mind. If I'm right, it is 3 teaspoons of fresh yeast for 1 teaspoon of instant or active dry yeast. So, but still, as I mentioned, it's not on top of my head because I don't use it on a daily basis. I'll put a note here or in the link in the description box below. Okay, so there are a lot of, again I have received a lot of queries on yeast, different types of yeast, which one to use and which one to not use. I think yeast itself needs a separate video or a separate post. At this stage, I would like to suggest you guys to check out our Instagram profile if you are on that platform, because soon I'm going to make a small infographic. So infographics are these things that you can see right here. I have been making on Instagram, which I am getting a positive feedback on, that these are super helpful. So I'm soon going to make one on yeast. So if you want, you can follow me there. And I understand that some of you guys do not use Instagram. So for you all, I have another suggestion, which is to consider checking the 4-day free course that I provide on my email newsletters. So not only the 4-day course, you also get an ebook for free, which has 10 tips that are perfect for a beginner, especially for a beginner, I would say. So if you do not use Instagram, then definitely consider subscribing to our newsletter for the same tips that I share in my emails as well. So these were the few bread queries or bread baking mistakes that you should be avoiding. So apart from this, I also thought, let me share some tips with you all so that be it any recipe, you know you are not going to make a mistake while making another bread now. So the first tip for you is to use a small amount of milk powder, even if the bread doesn't call for. Bread recipe doesn't call for. So milk powder is an enrichment which softens the dough. So eventually your bread would also be softer. But if you do not have milk powder, also retailed as dry milk in stores, so if you do not have that, then I would suggest replacing a certain amount of water with milk. So milk has additional proteins in it which softens the dough and eventually gives a better bread loaf. The second is that the dough should be well hydrated. Now, most common mistake that I often hear is, I have followed the recipe perfectly, I have followed the recipe to the T, but my bread dough doesn't turn out as yours or any other recipe that you might be following. That is because when it comes to bread, you should not follow the recipe to the T. The amount of liquid or water or milk that I used or I needed for a bread dough would definitely vary depending upon what kind of bread dough you are using. Now think of it, both of us are living in different time zone, different climatic zone, and we are getting a totally different branded ingredients. So here at the moment it is super cold, and I know in India it is raining now, which is humid. In Bombay is always humid, that's a different story. So okay, let's not get into weather. What I mean is, for me it is winters here, and for US or India it is mostly summers now. So depending upon the climatic conditions, the flour would get damp. That is one. Second, the stores that we are buying and the brands that we are using, so you do not know how the flour is made. So depending upon brand to brand, the amount of water needed would vary. Third, you do not know how old or new your flour is. So even if you're buying it, yes, even if you bought it yesterday from the shopkeeper, but you do not know how long the shopkeeper has stored it in his shops. So you know, the older the bread flour be it any flour for that matter, the older the flour, the more water it would take. What I want to say here is that always feel the dough. If your dough needs more water, then definitely go forward and add it. And at the same time, if you think that it is enough, then stop, do not add. So third tip that I wanted to share is shaping. So no matter which recipe you're following, ensure that you're shaping it well. Why is it important is that while making a bread dough, that is while shaping it, it should be such that the top of the dough should feel as smooth and as soft as baby's bum. So yeah, that is what the top of the dough is referred to as. So if it is not smooth, then you might end up getting cracks, the dough might split, the top might dry. There are several things that could go wrong, and you would feel that you have been doing everything right, but hey, where did I go wrong? So shaping is equally important. So to put it into a bullet form, the 3 tips that I wanted to share in this video is that to use milk powder or milk based So 3 tips that I want to put it out in a bullet point is that use milk powder or replace some amount of water with milk. The second point is to do not follow the recipe to the T, whereas feel your dough. If you think that it needs more water, definitely go ahead and add more water. And the third thing is shaping. Ensure that the top of your bread is smooth as a baby's bum. Coming to the most awaited section, which is cakes. So addressing the $1 million question here, which is, why does my cake sink in the middle?